Welcome to Session 7, National Domains. I'm Lori Donovan, and I'm the chair. Just a few housekeeping things to note. We really encourage you to ask questions. There's a Q&A function. If this is your first session that you've attended so far, the Q&A function is on the right-hand side in the chat box. So you can ask questions as yourself or anonymously. If you like a question, you can upvote it, because once we get to the participant questions part of the session, I'll start with the ones that are at the top of the list. One other thing to note is that these sessions will be recorded, and they might be published at some point in the future. So speakers, don't say anything that you don't want to have recorded. I will just really briefly give some bios for our speakers today. Jefferson Bailey is at the Internet Archive. He joined in summer of 2014. Prior to IA, he worked on strategic initiatives, digital preservation, archives, and digital collections at institutions like the Metropolitan New York Library Council, Library of Congress, Brooklyn Public Library, and the Frick Art Reference Library. And he's also worked in the archives at NARA, NASA, and Atlantic Records. He has an MLIS in Archival Studies from the University of Pittsburgh and a BA in English from Oberlin College, and he's a past president of Iipc. Next up is Kees. I didn't confirm the pronunciation of your last name before this, so apologies. It's Teszelszky. Teszelszky, okay. And Kees has been online since 1992 and has made use of computers since 1984. He is a historian and a curator of the digital collections at the National Library of the Netherlands. He has been involved in research on web archiving and born digital sources since 2012. His present research field covers the selection, harvest, and presentation of born digital sources and digital humanities, and he's currently involved in projects on internet archaeology in the Netherlands, mapping the Frisian and Dutch national web domain, online news, special web collections, and the historic sources of our post-truth era. And then finally, Moisés Rockembach is a professor at the Department of Information Science, Faculty of Library Science and Communication at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil. He has a PhD in Information and Communication in Digital Platforms with a postdoctorate at the University of Porto. He's a lead researcher at the Research Group on Web Archiving and Digital Preservation at the National Council for Scientific and Technological Development in Brazil. So now I'm going to give each of the speakers a chance to remind you of their wonderful presentations that you before this session. I'm going to go ahead and start with Jefferson.
Thanks, Laurie. Thanks for the intro. Good to meet you as well. So thank you for watching my talk, and thanks for coming to this session. We did a project called the Whole Earth Web Archive. The title was a play on the Whole Earth Catalog, which was a thing in the United States. It was kind of like a counterculture magazine catalog, kind of sort of the equivalent of a search engine before search engines exist, because it was pre-web. So it was a play on the name, San Francisco, California kind of thing. It came out of a couple of different projects that we've been doing. We've been trying to figure out how can we make better search verticals into the web collection at Internet Archive. The Wayback Machine in totality is too big to do full text search, but how can we find interesting portions that we can do more keyword or fun type of search and discovery interfaces into portions of the web collection? And we had done the animated GIFs from GeoCities, which is gifcities.org. We'd extracted PowerPoints from the military domain in the US, .mil. And we had been working with a number of national libraries to basically build Wayback Machines for them that was built on top of their CCTLD collections that were in the Wayback Machine that were just crawled as part of Internet Archive regular crawling. So we had all these sort of projects that were about how to do better search and discovery at portions of the web collection. And we married that with the other thought that we've been thinking about lately, which is that a lot of the web and a lot of the the world's culture is not represented in our web archive. Still tends to be activity done by large institutions, wealthy, generally North American or European, mostly white. So we wanted to both collect this information better as well as provide an exploratory interface. And so we took the 50 smallest CCTLDs by zone file, or how many seeds we think there are on their national domain registrar. And so we took those, we extracted all the content from the Wayback Machine. We also did more crawling. We also did outreach to talk to them and built this interface that has some fun features. Wikipedia search box about the country, little GIFs, drop downs. You can do format search and things like that. So that's kind of the thing, and that's it. I'll stop there.
Perfect. Thank you, Jefferson. Kees?
Hello, I'm Kees Teszelszky from the KB National Library of the Netherlands. Thank you for having me here. Well, today I'm going to speak with you about our Frisian web domain crawl. Well, our library has quite a large web collection which consists of selective crawls. This is because we are the only country next to Switzerland which does not have a legal deposit law. So that's why I was thinking 2 years ago, so how can we conduct a national domain crawl without breaking the law and without being put into jail? So that's why I thought within our big national domain of the Netherlands, which consists of 10 million websites, there's a very small one, and that's the Frisian national domain. The Frisians, it's a special type of Dutch people. They speak Frisian. They live in one region. They have their own culture, their own language, and they were very active on, for instance, Wikipedia, and they have a very strong identity. So I thought about it, how can a national web like that of the Frisians be delimited to the World Wide Web, so a national web archive of the Frisians can be constructed? So I mapped this web domain. We made several criteria, and we are really thankful to the Internet Archive and to Jefferson Bailey, because he helped us identifying Frisian websites in the Internet Archive. And we had a really good contact with Frisian cultural organizations to collect sites and to let them help us, so to identify what's important for them from the point of view of born digital heritage. And another special thing of our mapping was that we mapped the Frisian language Wikipedia, and we also added it to our Frisian national domain crawl. And to end, the Frisian domain crawl has not been conducted yet due to technical issues and, of course, the COVID pandemic, but we will do it in future. Thank you.
Moisés, do you want to go ahead?
Thanks, Laurie. It's nice to see you again. So my name is Moisés Rockembach. I'm professor at Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil. I also research in the working group of web archiving and digital preservation. And my research, it's about Brazilian election web archiving. So my work addressed the importance of the preservation of web as a source of information and digital memory for society, and a case study applied to 2018 Brazilian election, presidential election. Research developed in the research group on web archive and digital preservation in Brazil. Our curatorship resulted in the study of 13 presidential candidates and a list of 27 seeds composed of 13 political party websites, 11 presidential candidates websites, and 3 candidates special websites with distinct campaign contents related to specific details of campaign proposals. As a result, we built together with the research group and volunteers a Brazilian web archive platform under the website arquivo.ong.br. That's it.
Thanks, everyone. And I already see some questions coming in over the Q&A, which is wonderful. But I have a few questions prepared already for the group. So some threads that I sort of pulled out from your kind of presentations and that sort of overlapped between you. one was around engaging with the communities and the creators that were being collected. So, you know, it really varies based on the scale of the web archiving project that you're doing, how reasonable it is to engage with communities. How have you, or will you, incorporate that into your process? And why do you feel like that's something that's worth doing? I call on Kees, or sorry, go ahead, Jefferson.
Well, you should call on people probably.
Okay.
Sorry, microphone was off. Yeah, well, actually, with the involvement of the community started with talking to people. We had already some experience when we were web archiving the websites of the Chinese community in the Netherlands. It turned out that they did not understand the concept of digital heritage. So a website was not heritage for them. I mean, the poems of an emperor which was deceased 5,000 years ago, this is heritage. Where a website is not heritage. So that's why with this experience, I knew that I have to go to the Frisians. So I went there and I spoke to them, and I gave all kind of lectures, gave interviews for newspapers to make people aware of how important it is that their digital heritage will be preserved. So it's about contact. What we also did is that we made a flyer in the Frisian language, which we presented to all kind of Frisian heritage organizations, and from there they distributed there to their members, to in one A4 poster to let them understand what we are doing. So it's not a really difficult technical thing. We really want to preserve their own heritage, and I really asked the community itself to send us websites, and I made an open list of websites, and they could add their own suggestions to it, and that really worked. So we have never got any complaints about any Frisian who said you're not allowed to archive our websites. And why is this important? Because at the moment that I was doing this whole thing, at that moment, the Frisian farmers were protesting against Dutch government, and they went to The Hague in their, on their machines, and they blocked the parliament and everything. So beneath my window at the library, there were the protesting Frisian farmers, and we web archivists looked to each other and we asked, when will they come for us? But they never came for us, and they were really happy about it. So there are all kind of positive Frisian articles about our work.
That's great. It does make sense that including them in the process will hopefully prevent them from coming at you with their pitchforks or their tractors.
To prevent angry farmers, yeah.
Totally. Wonderful. Jefferson, did you want to talk a little bit about engaging with national libraries or national organizations in the WEWA countries?
Sure. We've tried over time. We did a Cuban domain crawl a couple years ago when the U.S.-Cuba relations were thawing, or when travel got reallowed, and Brewster, representing Internet Archive, visited the National Library of Cuba at the time, and we did a domain crawl for them and took them and gave it to them in a disk that had a bow on top, or hard drives with bows on top, or something like that. We've obviously been doing it more recently as part of the WEWA project. It's hard. A lot of it, if you look in there, like North Korea is in the WEWA collection. We're not doing a lot of outreach there, to be honest. Antarctica is in there, .aq. Not a whole lot of things to do there, but some of the countries, we've certainly been talking a lot to the Caribbean and things where it's we have more connections from the US or from North America. That more people have worked with that part of the world that are smaller countries that are a lot of CCTLDs, also sort of Pacific Island nations as well. But again, it's hard, a lot of these, they might not have a national library. The national library might be hosted or associated with a research university. These are obviously very small and under-resourced nations in many cases. Some of them are nations in conflict or with many government transitions. so it can be challenging. So it's really, as I said in the video, like if people have contacts, that's awesome. We have some, but we don't have as many as we IIPC have in totality. So any connections are helpful. And again, we're pretty much doing free services and partnerships, and we'll do what we can to provide IA and IIPC infrastructure and services and connections and training and all these things pretty much for free to help them better understand web archiving or even possibly do it. So that outreach is outreach. It's hard, and a lot of these countries are small in our project, so there's challenges, and we don't have a good contact. Trying to go through professional associations like IFLA and other things like that has been one avenue with some success, but so more work to be done. Some successes, but a lot to go.
That makes sense. Moisés, do you have anything on that topic on outreach? It wasn't something you touched on a lot in your presentation, but I'd be really curious to hear more, especially as you are kind of growing the breadth of what gets captured in Brazil.
Yeah. We started a short time ago, so it's difficult for now. We engage people and institutions by lectures and workshops online. In the pandemic time, I think it's more easy achieve some people because Brazil, is a huge country and need to go to many states. So with lectures and workshops, we started to popularize the web archive, and the preservation of the web is the work we do now.
Okay. Yeah, I think understanding web archiving and the uses is something that's not always straightforward for the average citizen. So I think finding a way to convey that in a way that's meaningful. And Kees, I appreciated your analogy about the Chinese, where like the bones are the thing that's cultural heritage, not websites. But I think that will certainly shift more and more as time goes on, and the web is more ubiquitous. Another question that I had before I turned to ones that came in over the Q&A was digging just a little bit, many of you talked sort of high level about some of the analyses that you did on the collections that you captured, or how you created, in the case of WEWA, how you created those data sets. So I think that there might be folks here who would be interested in hearing even just a little bit more about the technical aspects, like how you actually did that. So Moisés, if you don't mind going first this time, you talked a little bit about analyzing, the collection that you discussed was a small one, but you talked about kind of analyzing content drift and link rot and sort of how that content changed over the course of 2 years. How did you do that analysis? What other analyses do you think would be useful for the collections that you're creating?
Comparing the seeds captured 3 years ago now, we have 85% this website would be lost. So it's a huge percentile, and this gives us the justification for our work. I think we started with elections, but now we archive also news about COVID and climate changes. It's another thematics that we approach, and I think it will be the same in 2 or more years. We lost these websites. Let's see.
what about, Kees, you mentioned in your talk a fair bit about kind of how you figured out what was part of the Frisian domain, and some of the different places that content might come from, aside from just the country code top level domain. So do you want to talk a little bit more about how you did that?
Yes, well, first of all, the Frisians have their own top level domain. But I thought if I have time now and I have money for my management, so I can really conduct a really good exploration of how a web domain, what are the borders of a web domain. So of course, first of all, we always go to the top level domain, and that was the .frl top level domain. But second, I was looking for where are the in this Frisian region where the Frisians live. So which sites are published there? Well, that geographical analysis was really hard to do. I had a list of the .nl top level domains, but it was really hard to find out which websites are published within this geographical region. It also turned out that the .frl websites are actually hosted in the UK, so they're not even hosted in the Frisian region. So that was second, and the language that was much more easier thanks to Jefferson, and also that we did some other. We also used the Common Crawl collection, and we also got some help from them to find Frisian language websites. And we also did some analysis on our existing selective web collection. So if there were any other Frisian websites. And why is this language so important? Well, this is the second official language of the Netherlands, but it's only used in this small region of Friesland. But it turned out that the Frisian language there's an incredible amount of variation. The same is about the language variation in the Netherlands. We are really regional. There are really strong regional or even local identities. So it means that you can have a street and people on one end of the street, they speak differently than the people from the other end of the street, and also that it's not homogeneous. So it's a total mixture. So they did some born digital analysis of the Frisian language through apps. And it was fascinating, and I hope people can do this research again with the help of our web collection. So then Wikipedia was of course also very interesting to analyze, and Iris Geldermans, who is I think also present here, she did the technical analysis of Wikipedia. So what part of the Frisian Wikipedia, which is in the Frisian language, do we have to select, and what part we do not have to select? So that's technically it's much more difficult to select parts of Wikipedia which would be interesting to include in your domain crawl than we thought, but we had enough time to do this. Then network is of course important, that you look within your corpus that what kind of websites are mostly quoted and need to be included in your corpus. And then of course the history of the Frisian web domain. So the Frisians used the top level domain of France to publish their websites because of the FR. So in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, they're also in their web collection, there are also Frisian websites. So that was also interesting observation, and also that the Frisian domain is quite old. I mean, there are a lot of Frisian language homepages, but to identify them and to find them, that was really a challenge. So yeah, that's it.
Jefferson, did you want to talk a little bit about how the WAWA domains were identified and collected?
Sure. So, it's as we say in the project description, it's a relatively arbitrary number. It's a proof of concept project. So we didn't want to make something like super huge. So we just had to pick a number, and 50 was good. And 50 of the smallest ended up being, so we just chose those 50 by what the size of their zone file was, and that was the list. Once we have that, we just go to the global CDX index for the Wayback Machine, and we extract every record over time from those 50, and that is sort of the starting corpus. Some other things we did we do have sort of, if you look in the interface, top sites. So we did a little graph analysis by domain. So like, I don't know, Iraq or something, like what is the most linked to by other sites and .iq or something. And that's something we do normally as a course of business and other projects. So that was pretty rinse and repeat. So that's the candidate corpus. And then, you know, we have special search features in there, which also came from other projects, but we tweaked a little bit for this one, which is you can filter by website, image, audio, video, and PDF, and you can multi-select those, which is something we hadn't actually done in other projects. It was small enough to do that. And then there's some, you know, results filtering and tweaking as far as like how it works and what Elasticsearch does, which is the search index we use. Once you click on something, it just goes to the Wayback Machine capture of that thing. So all the embeds automatically get included and things like that. I think it ended up, we also, of course, ran a crawl update the corpus, and we're running another one now, and we just updated the collection pretty recently. And it ends up being about 20,000 seeds for those 50 domains to run a crawl of all 50 at the same time. So some of the tech stuff. There's great UI UX, which was done by other UX engineers in Internet Archive. So that was a good internal collaboration since we hadn't done that before. So pulling in the Wikimedia info box on the side, a lot of this is pretty much like Google, right? We're not creating anything like mind blowing, but that's people's search experience, right? Is Wikipedia is multi-format search things, and we're just trying to get web archives closer to that in different projects. So I thought it was a good exploration of how to do that as well.
That makes sense. I'm going to shift gears now to the Q&A questions that have come in. The first one is actually also for Jefferson. About the WAWeb project, have you done any gap analysis to figure out what countries might still be left uncovered?
I'll do it as part of my answer. So we have 50 in there. There's 50-ish in Iipc, right? I'm going to guesstimate 35 to 40 of those are countries or have their own ccTLD or not, like universities or something. So that's 90. There's 220 something ish national domains. So the gap analysis is 225 minus 90 with I'll have to hold on, get my
135. 135.
Wow, good job.
So that means more have not been.
Yeah. I think there's a question around what are small ones that really don't have the resources as opposed to folks that don't fall in this, that are doing it themselves or aren't in Iipc or big enough to do it themselves or something like that. And I think we thought about maybe doing 100. The idea was do 50, see how it goes, see what like time and people and infrastructure it takes, and then maybe expand it to 100. So I think we would just try to double, and it would just be the same metric. So like, what are the next 50 smallest by size of zone file or something?
That makes sense.
It's not a great way to do it's not a perfect gap analysis, but we could have another list if there were a different way to evaluate what we think is, especially in need of preservation action, then that could be another way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be interesting to know, how many of those domains are getting picked up as like a matter of course by IA crawling versus like need that like targeted crawling that we did for the WAWA countries. I know you mentioned like some of them maybe weren't represented much at all in what you extracted.
Yes, I think there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that just day-to-day global harvesting is better collecting that kind of material, because it is really dominated by news and top domains and top ccTLDs and the .coms and stuff like that.
Right.
So I do think a lot of this stuff, I mean, we're intentionally crawling it now as part of the project, but its representation in the past is pretty spotty. So a lot of the queries for the smaller domains, even in the WAWA interface, will return nothing, which is a bummer. So.
Let's see, Kees, there was a question about if you've had any feedback from users of the collection who identify as Frisian, and I would also be curious about that. The question that I had that I didn't get to yet was about use and both anticipated and actual. So.
Yeah, well, I anticipated on people who are doing research on language. So due to the fact that there is so much language variation. So there was one PhD student who wanted to conduct research on this corpus, but unfortunately she was from the north of the Netherlands, and there was no professor there who could support her. So that's why she decided not to go further with this research, and it chose another topic. So that was a pity. On the other hand, I know that there are some people who are some students who want to use this corpus for to see how the Frisian identity is changing. So in the way how they use colors, what kind of images they use on the websites by close reading the home pages. So this is another line of research which is interesting. And there was another question about the other regions of the Netherlands. Well, actually, other regions also want that we do the same kind of domain crawl. The only thing is, this is of course quite costly. It takes a lot of time and techniques, and also the Frisians have their own language. So this is also something different. So there's of course a difference between dialect and language. So yeah, so I really have to think about if I will do this again for another region.
Yeah, it would be hard. It seems like it would be hard to identify what belongs to a different region that didn't have that kind of unique language and culture.
And the also thing is, this is about identity, which is a really sensitive issue. So if I, as a curator, decide that this belongs to the community and this not, then I'm also, like an anthropologist, I'm involved in identity making and in building a community, and that's really tricky thing. So that's why you really need to have the community itself and to feel where are the sensitive points of them, and and not hurt them, of course.
Right. That's an excellent point, and something that I think a lot of folks who are documenting communities kind of grapple with. Let's see, there's another question. The next question is for everyone on the panel. Thoughts about how IIPC could raise more awareness about global efforts that might go beyond the borders of our member institution countries. And that was definitely something that Jefferson mentioned in his talk, about doing outreach to the WAWA countries, to other countries who aren't part of IIPC, and kind of figuring out ways that we being IIPC as an organization can really reach out to places that aren't represented by the current membership.
Yep, I have some project ideas that we'll propose to the SC or to the membership for how we can do that. Usually, free stuff, training, services, infrastructure is a good thing. I mean, a lot of smaller countries are resource strapped or don't have a lot of staff or things like that. So even if you create avenues for them to participate in the consortium, it just might be there's time challenges, there's language, culture barriers. So I think just creative thinking around lowering those barriers, as well as just having lucrative things that you can offer, not just a membership, but like how that membership can help in their own professional development, help their library in services for their users and things like that. So I think there's definitely some outreach ideas that we'll be throwing around within the IIPC this year. I mean, I think Kees has sort of the best, his project of ours was the most closely involved with the creator communities, whatever you want to call them, with the actual citizens from this area. So I think it would be valuable to take what he learned as part of his work and try to think about how you could expand that, you know, by continent or even globally.
And I can add something to that of what Jefferson told us now. So this whole World Web Archive, I wrote an article about it, and I used the small national domains, which were once part of the Dutch colonies. And I wrote about it. And on the basis of this, people reached out to me that they said, we do not have a national library or a national archive. Please, can you help us with our national domain? So in this way, Jefferson, they were really happy that you did this, and it's a kind of, you know, it's a kind of tennis. You know, you throw the ball and I beat the ball further. So I think we really need these kind of incentives for these kind of small nations to take the next step. So people have to be aware of that they have digital heritage and that it is important to keep it, even if they don't have a national library or a kind of national heritage institution.
Yeah, one thing we also tried to do was talk to funders that are funding projects internationally. So big philanthropic foundations often do have connections in these. They might be government connections, and they might be like a federal agency or an NGO or something like that. But yeah, NGOs are very involved in cultural heritage preservation as well. So that was another avenue we tried to use to like sort of get connections to folks, you know, in those places.
Makes sense. Moisés, did you have any thoughts? I know you're not from a small country, but I'm really curious on your perspective, both within Brazil and in South America and other areas as well.
Yeah, I agree with Jefferson in many things. I think Iipc doing a lot of things. The training resources, the open source softwares it's very good, but I think we have a long run to do when we start a web archive program, and you have a learning curve. So we need to do more about this.
Yeah, I think starting small and sort of getting your feet beneath you makes a lot of sense. And yeah, let's see, we still have a little bit of time left. I'm looking, let's see. We've talked a little bit around this next question, so I'm just curious if anyone has anything else to add. How do you represent communities in the way that they want to be represented in a web archive? So if your communities ask you to be selective about what you archive, do you choose not to include certain things? I think, you know, as we already kind of mentioned, Kees was the one who's most in touch with, or spent the most time working with the community that he was archiving in this instance. But also, I think, you know, there may be relevant experience that folks have that maybe aren't solely tied to the projects that they're talking about.
Yeah, there are also a lot of sensitive issues, you know, regarding a community. So you have to take care of that, but you do not have to go out of the way of that. So I think if you do a domain crawl, or if you want to collect heritage of a community, you need it all. You have to collect it all. Sometimes it's better that people do not know how much is actually crawled about them. I mean, if people know what's in the Internet Archive, they're most of the time they're shocked. And so the same is also in our own library. When we started our selective crawls, and there were some people who objected that their website was going to our web archive. And in the beginning we said, yeah, but it's also in the Internet Archive. And then we learned that we do not have to say this, because otherwise people are going to the Internet Archive and going to remove it. So I think it's better to archive something, and then within 100 or 150 years, then people can sort it out and can shift and can say, okay, this was important, this is not important, and not immediately present everything to users. That you need some historic distance, and this is what normally is happening in archives and in libraries. It's stored there, people forget it, and then after 50 years, people are rediscovering it. So, and this is the some cycle that we do not have in web archives, because everything can be found again and can be indexed and can be searched through. So sometimes maybe it's even better just to crawl something, to put it on a hard drive and forget about it for at least 50 years.
Just make sure the hard drive still works.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for our project, it was at a domain scale. That even for a small domain, the one thing we did was try to prioritize capture of government things, since they're usually identifiable by a subdomain.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like, since these are tiny countries, under-resourced, it's likely none of it's getting collected. So, and it's the size at the end of the day for at least IA crawling, and for many big national libraries is pretty trivial in size of data, and crawlers needed. I do think we did try to do outreach to get people to suggest things that were not obvious, basically newspapers and government things that are easy to find, easy to collect. It might not be perfect, but at the end of the day, you're collecting most of it. But other things like, like Kees mentioned, many of these countries would have very important sites that are not on their CCTLD.
Yeah.
We didn't bother to do that analysis. We could, what's the most non-CCTLD thing linked to from the CCTLD is another analysis we can do, but we hadn't done that yet, but that might be something interesting. Or just curated list from some subject expert, either in the country or that studies the country, like at a research institute or something, or other ways that we could try to get priority sites. And in those cases, we could even put those into like browser-based crawlers, or give it some sort of queue prioritization or something like that. So,
yeah. I mean, I think there probably are a lot of non-CCTLD sites that are like easy for people to put up, like, or even like a Facebook page might be the website for like restaurants or like, whatever. I mean, I'm not saying it's, I know, nightmares, but I think it's the case in a lot of places where, they don't have access to web hosting infrastructure, to even do it on their own domain, potentially.
So I have one addition to this. I'm sorry.
Well, to speak to Kees's point, like we can do language analysis of stuff in the Wayback Machine and have done that. So that might be something that we could do for when useful for the 50 CCTL. And that could give some insight, but again, it's not perfect and it's not human determined.
So we did some link analysis of our initial crawl, and we found out that the most linked websites are those media websites or news websites in their own language. So these are incredibly important for the community to have their own radio, television, internet news, literature, etc., in their own language. So I think if you really want to grab the heritage of a community, you have to start there. But of course, that's the most difficult, because a lot of times it's behind paywalls, or it's hard to crawl it because it's radio, or but these are really important to the community itself.
In Brazil, we have a big problem. I think we have a lot of unrepresented communities. So not just in web archiving, but documenting, digital documenting. So I think a strategy maybe is bring the people, the community next to us, not just to as a users, but for nominations, website nominations, and select crawlers, I think is a good strategy to do.
Yeah, yeah, really get them involved and get them saying, this is what's important to us. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think our remaining time is very quickly disappearing. So thank you all three of you, for your time in recording talks, in discussing here today. Thanks everyone who is attending for your wonderful questions. Very much appreciated. I believe we can continue questions for a little bit after this session. On floor 4 is where we were aiming to do that. There'll be some tables available. All the tables up there will be available for Q&A to follow on to this talk. And then this is the last session, or the last session of block 2. So the next session starts at 2100. Is that right? CEST.
Yes, that's perfectly correct. And I would also like to thank Laurie for chairing this session, and thanks also to all the speakers. So with that being said, let's go back to the networking mode.
Wonderful.